to my colleague from Texas, Mr. Allred, to introduce his constituent.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am excited to introduce Dr. Andrew Exum, a constituent of mine from Dallas. Dr. Exum is an executive at Hackett & Company, a global management consultancy. Before that, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle East Policy from 2015 until 2017. And previously, he served active duty in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he led a light infantry and ranger platoons, and later served as a civilian in the Department of Defense on a fellowship from the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Exum, thank you so much for coming, sir. We have some friends in common who have spoken highly of you. I'm sure everything they said is not true, but we're happy to have you here, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. It's worth pointing out, as the member representing South Florida, that many of the witnesses who appear before our committee one day will ultimately reside in my district as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel. Read your written statements and learned a lot, and I think this is a very important topic. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this. As we're kind of tilting now to world power competition, I see the Middle East as just an extension of what we're seeing even in our own hemisphere, but certainly around the world. And so I want to kind of talk about how we counter influence and how we can do that in a way that is consistent with our economic values as well, but also militarily. And so I want to begin with arms sales because, as you're aware, China and Russia are selling arms to our allies, and we've even seen some of our arms in Yemen, for example, ending up in the hands of Al-Qaeda. And I'm wondering if we have any concerns, or if you have any concerns about China and Russia getting access to classified information or to any of our military systems, and better understandings of that, and how and what the Congress can do in mitigating the risk of to U.S. military equipment to try and prevent that. Ms. Wormuth, do you want to take it first?
Sure, happy to do that. I think what we see with Chinese and Russian arms sales, more probably Russia than China, of course it's a source of revenue for them. But what I saw happen over the last few years is, as the countries in the Middle East become less confident of whether the United States is going to be there, become frustrated, frankly, sometimes with the conditions that we put on our arms sales, which we do so in most cases for very good reasons, they have essentially engaged in hedging behavior, and sort of they look particularly at Russia as an alternative. You know, when Egypt got really fed up with us for not selling them things because of the conditions that Congress, among others, put on those sales, they turned to Moscow. And I think that will keep happening, I think, unless we do a better job of making it clear that we are staying in the region and that we are reliable. They may not like everything that we have to say to them, but I think right now countries are not really sure exactly what our approach is. And
so just to follow up really quickly on that, because you touched a little bit on the restrictions that we put in place and the things we ask of our allies. On this committee, we've been talking a lot about our kind of withdrawal from global leadership on human rights and standing up for those, especially in this region. Do you think it's possible to maintain that commitment and to carry that goal while also continuing to partner in the way that we have on arms and others, by perhaps, as you were saying, making sure they understand that we are here to stay, we're going to be part of this, expressing some sort of overall strategy?
I think it's important that we continue to have human rights and basic freedoms be an important part of our foreign policy, frankly. And I think that should be part of our conversation with countries in the region.
Dr. Exum?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing. I mean, I think over the past 30 years, we've had this theory of the case that if we build up Gulf, especially host nation security capacity, then we will be able to remove some of those 35,000 roughly U.S. troops that are in the Gulf. I think 59,000 in the region alone, so it's a huge investment on our case. The challenge, to my mind, the strategic challenge is if you build up that host nation security capacity, they might actually use it, and that's been the case in Yemen, right? Our end-use monitoring regimes are pretty darn good if the weapons are in garrison. if they're deployed in an expeditionary fashion, it gets tougher to keep track of exactly where all those weapons are going. I would echo everything that Ms. Wormuth said. I think that the Senate has done a good job in forcing a binary choice on Turkey with respect to the F-35 and the S-400. Another area that I would put on your radar is that the restrictions that we have, some of them for very good reasons, on unmanned aircraft and UAVs means that they're bringing in Chinese or Russian UAVs, often with Chinese or Russian engineers in close proximity to advanced U.S. weapon systems. That's something that I think the Congress can take a hard look at to make sure that the U.S. Department of Defense and the Department of State are keeping appropriate distance between those weapon systems and foreign nationals.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.